morning, everybody. I'm pleased to have you today for the second class in American Lit. I know that the first class was introductory, and this is also an introductory class because, as you see here, we're going to have a look at how America was founded, the early explorers, the early settlers of America, and the kind of writings they were writing. And perhaps today we can succeed in identifying certain distinctive features that might later evolve to form what we call American literature today. But before I start, I want to listen from you about what you read last time. The 4 chapters. What do you remember? Did this reading change a little bit about your view about America? Yes?
Not too much.
Not too much.
Yeah. The beginning was purely historical. I did like the most thing is when you discover how, for example, Boston, James City was established or were established.
Do you remember who established Jamestown?
Yeah, James Smith.
John Smith.
John Smith, yes.
Okay.
And the thing that changed my idea is when they started talking about literature and their literature and how when they are exiled by King James VIII, they started to formulate their own history, their own country. And the things that America could write itself in history by literature. So their literature has great effect till now.
So, in these chapters, there were many attempts to demarcate, or identify what is American literature.
Yeah.
Okay. What else? Yes, please.
I like the idea that the author focused on how powerful the literature could be in forming the identity of the Americans. And
mainly, during the Revolution period and after the Revolution period, when America, maintained its political independence, yet they did not have their literary independence, which, I think came at a later period. Okay, what else? Yes, Sri?
I like the idea that the written language in particular is the most important. Because we have...
So we are having some writing which are recorded.
Yes, there are for example, lyrics or songs that which is narrating the past events, but since it is not written, so they didn't consider it as formal as the written words.
You're talking about the oral,
The oral
literature of this say.
It's not that powerful as the written one, because the written one will be passing through generations in the future.
Okay, but did anybody pay attention why those people were writing? Besides the identity issue, mainly the early settlers.
To keep their narration to the others' narration.
To convey a message.
Yes.
Because they were coming from Europe, so they needed to attract more people. Okay, I realized that the reading was not easy. So today, as you see, I'm starting by the romantic image of America. So we're telling the story of America, how America, was established. But I would say by a quote, by some critics. I don't remember the name. He said, if America had not been, discovered, it would have been invented.
Yes.
America, perhaps the new word, as they call it, was in the mind of the European in the Renaissance time and even before the Renaissance time. America, or this world beyond the sea, beyond the ocean, was an inspiring motive to a lot of writers in Europe, mainly, in England. We still remember how pastoral poetry was projecting, in a way or another, like this unknown land. How, some writers like Thomas More in his Utopia was, trying to project, even Shakespeare and others. Shakespeare in, The Tempest was anticipating this encounter between the European, the colonizers, and the colonized. So the idea of America and what was, America, like there was a lot of, writing, written about America even before America was discovered. So the image of America was a romantic image. It is a land, beyond the sea. It aroused the curiosity of the European. It's this romantic, image, this romantic place. But it's very important to know, I know that you don't like history, but I want to take you a little bit, about the early, how America, was explored. By the way, America, was explored by mistake. The early explorers, as you see, we have Columbus, Christopher Columbus, who, landed on America, I think, 1492. Then he was followed by Francisco Vasco de Cornedo, another Spanish. These are Spanish people. Those people, when they were there, they met the people. They saw the indigenous people, and they started to report. And their reports, or their written records, whether historical records or even personal letters, had this promotional, sign, promotional trait. Yes, because they wanted to attract people to come. And of course, those people interpreted, it's very important to understand this, interpreted what they saw, because they brought with them the language, they brought with them the culture, so they interpreted what they saw by, their own, cultural paradigms, by their linguistic, So they imposed their culture on whatever they saw. There is like, an account by another explorer who, his name is Capeza de Vaca. He's Spanish as well. And he landed in Florida, what is now Florida, and he was lost for 8 years. So he was looking for people, Florida, he came from Texas, then he, was in Florida. He spent 8 years looking for some people. He wrote in his journal something interesting about those people, how the indigenous people were having their own rituals, their, how they were eating, how they're, when they were hungry. He described a scene of famine where they were ready to have stones. But what attracted me, to his description is the way he, drew them in an animalistic, image. Okay, so these explorers opened, the gate for other settlers. Of course, many European countries were competing, to explore, to go. These explorers most of them were going and coming back. But it was not until, the 16th century, or 17th century, when the English, expeditioner and knight, he was a knight. He was working, John Smith, he was working for Virginia Company. So, his trip was mainly commercial trip, because America, as it was reported back by, Columbus and others, was an ebullient land, a rich land, a land of richness and abundance. So those commercial enterprises were attracted to America, and they started to go on expeditions. If you remember, when we were taking the poetry course, we spoke about Raleigh as one of the explorers, like he was leading expedition for America. John Smith, yes, landed, in the Bay Colony in Jamestown, again, Massachusetts, and they established, a colony called, it's the first permanent colony, the first permanent colony. So they settled there. After that, some religious people started to come. And those religious are the Puritans.
Yeah.
The Puritans, we had an idea about the Puritans when we studied, again, the poetry course and other courses. What do we mean by Puritans?
Yes.
Yes?
They are the people, or the religious people who followed Henry VIII, I think,
Uh-huh.
who rejected the Catholic church and built another church for himself that supports the idea of being Puritan, a way of being.
Yes. So the Puritans were mainly a group of, Protestant, not Catholic, because, Rome was Catholic, and, England was Protestant. They were, Protestant who wanted to purify the Church of England, because they thought that Catholicism, is very restrictive. Catholicism, the upper hand is for the churchmen, the state people. So they thought that it was very restrictive for their own freedom. So they wanted to purify the church. Yes, King Henry, the VIII tried to placate them by making some reforms. Those people were all the time pressing, the government pressing the king to make some reforms, some changes. And I think, it was during James the First, the follower of, Queen Elizabeth. James the First kicked some of them out, some of those Puritans, about 3,000 people. They were kicked out, and they went to Holland. Those people, sailed to America in the second year, like we're talking about, 1620. They sailed, and, they established what is called Plymouth Plantation, which was led by, William Bradford. Bradford, he was a farmer. He came from a farmer. Later, there will be I'll be giving you a video, or leaving a video for you, which distinguishes between, Bradford and, Winthrop, John Winthrop. They are two mainly Puritans. One is separatist, and the other is, a Puritan, conformist. Winthrop. Bradford came on Mayflower, and the trip of Mayflower was not an easy. A lot of people perished, in the sea. They died, and half of them reached, Massachusetts. After them, we're talking about Winthrop and the famous Arabella journey. They came, more Puritans came, led by John Winthrop, and John Winthrop was the leader. So they had very interesting debates and meetings on ship. And I think, there is something called the Bay Colony Compact or Agreement. They agreed when they land how they should govern. And if you want, like, because America is known for its, democratic election, for its, Congress. So the idea of the Congress, the idea of election was here on, it was dictated by John Winthrop. So a lot of historians and a lot of politicians would admit John Winthrop as the one who laid the foundation of American democracy. We're talking about, early Puritans, Puritan period, but at the same time we want to see how, these circumstances shaped what is now called American literature, or what is now called American culture. Okay? Of course, this is, chapter 1. It was asking about what is American literature. Okay? And, as you saw, American literature, there was nothing called American literature. If we are talking about, the historical accounts, if we are talking about, the description of John Smith, the adventures of John Smith, the accounts of, Bradford, or even the sermon, okay, it is like literary, it is fictional, but you cannot say it is purely American. See? It's not purely American literature. But it is very important to look at these, records and to see what kind of fictionality, because we agreed on other courses that, history is not purely history. Because history is written by human beings, and the human beings, are biased to their culture, are biased to their point of view. So there's nothing called pure history. I mean, the fictionality is there. But it's very important, like, to see how they wrote. Because, if we look at Bradford, when he was describing how the American, or how those settlers, came with this millenarian dream to establish, a city on the hill. That was the Puritan belief. That was the Puritans' faith. They felt that it was God that sent them to this land to establish a new Jerusalem, a city upon the hill. They thought of themselves as the new Israelites. Okay? So they had a mission. It's very important to notice this, because this is the earliest version of the American dream. It is completely, spiritual. It's completely spiritual. However, those Puritans, and I should you should understand this, those Puritans were not only spiritual, they were hardworking people. They were hardworking, they were involved in commerce, in farming. So you have now the dichotomy of the American dream. The dichotomy of American dream, it has like two sides. It has, it started by having its spiritual aspect as well as,
like
its materialistic aspect. And I would like, to draw your attention, or like just to quote William Bradford from this, how he was, in a very ironical, very sarcastic manner, he was, criticizing those people who, when they came to settle America, or, he was criticizing them because they forgot about their early, early ambition, early, dream of establishing a hill. So when they found that this land was massive, was full of, richness, they started to do what? To forget about their spiritual dream. So what did he say? He said, corn and cattle rose to a great price, by which many were much enriched and committed as a group plentiful. And yet in other regards, the benefit turned to their heart. This benefit turned to their heart. And the accession of strength to their weakness. Look at, the paradoxes here. For now, as their stocks increased and they increased vendible, there was no longer any holding them together. But now they must of necessity go to their great lots. They could not otherwise keep their cattle, and having oxen grown, they must have land for plowing and tillage. And no man now thought he could live except he had a cattle and a great deal of ground to keep them all striving to increase their stocks. It seems like he's lamenting, he's criticizing those people. And of course, he continued to criticize these people, but using a very, allegorical style.
Yeah.
And it's very important because, a lot of, critics and historians thought that the first American book, literary book, is the Bible itself. Because those people were quoting the Bible. Those people were, their life was driven by what is called typology. They interpreted everything, by biblical incidents. So whatever happened to them, they would compare themselves to some prophets in the Bible, some incidents. And this is very important, typology. It's a kind of interpreting whatever is happening to you by, biblical stories. And this is very important later to understand when we study, the narrative of Mary Rowlandson. Then he continued to say, subtle serpent, a snake, hath slyly wound itself under fair pretense of necessity. And they like to untwist these sacred bonds and ties. It is now part of my misery in old age to find and feel the decay of and want, therefore, and with grief and sorrow of heart to lament and bewail the same. So he was not happy that those Americans who came with this, millenarian dream, this, romantic dream to build, a city upon the hill, they were distracted. So here we have, the dichotomy in the American dream itself. Dichotomy, the two, contradictory parts of the American dream. So you might have studied this in drama, how, like in Arthur Miller, like how the American dream became completely, materialistic one. Okay. Of course, those people were writing. And who were the readers? The readers were the settlers. The readers were the people in Europe. So they mainly wrote this to attract people to come to this land. See what I mean? But here, if we are talking about literature, poetry, okay, there was, some of them was writing poetry. They were writing poetry, but they were imitating. They were imitating whom? The British, the French, and here, I think you might have read that they were imitating those people. Shelley, others, Keats, and even, like the metaphysical poets, because when we study, Edward Taylor, we're going to be thrown in metaphysical poetry because he was, and even Anne Bradstreet was to some extent imitating those metaphysical poets. Okay. Now, the period between, let's say the exploration and the independence was very barren, period in terms of creativity. But as I told you, it is very important to look at the early records, the early narratives, the early poetry, because those things would help us to identify certain, characteristics that would, or certain factors that would shape American literature. For example, today we talk about allegory. So the allegory is originally a biblical style, allegory, which is equivalent to symbolism. And we said like a distinctive feature of American literature, it's, richness in symbolism. I mean, when the French critics wanted to demonstrate, their theory of symbolism, they didn't take, Coleridge, but they took Edgar Allan Poe, because Edgar Allan Poe was, you see, very, he was a master in, symbolism. Okay? This is what you read, this is what you quote. We have it in our power to begin, the word over again. A situation similar to the present hath not appeared since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new word is at hand. So they saw of themselves as founders of the new word. And last time we said that the new word was not new, because this assumption in fact subsumes a whole culture, a whole heritage called the indigenous, or the heritage, the culture of the indigenous people. But those people were, they saw themselves like the founders, the prophets of a new nation. Okay, here it's mentioned Irving, Washington Irving, and James Finney Cooper were the first writers who started to give flavor to what is American. Yes. Now we have to go back a little bit and to talk about the Puritan beliefs.
Yeah.
What did they believe in? And you should know that again that the Puritans, were very austere, very rigid people.
Yes, extreme.
They were, influenced. They were not necessarily adopting, the Calvinistic views. When we say Calvin, I'm going to take you to a further slides, to something called the tulip. What is the tulip? Now, those people, adopted almost the same beliefs, but not literally, A tulip is like Puritan, a very, strict Puritan dogma. Those people believed, the Puritans, the early Puritans who established America, I would say, because we're talking about Bay Colony, we're talking about, Bay Colony in Massachusetts, we're talking about Plymouth Plantation and other colonies, so they were the founders. This colony was expanding, John Winthrop, the one who gave a very touching sermon on Arabella, was, like the governor of this Bay Colony. Those Puritans, who of course were not the only inhabitants of the Bay Colony, but they were the majority. They were Quakers, they were Armenians, and there were Antinomians. There were other factions, and those people thought that, God sent these factions to oppose them and to test them. See? But they were very severe with those people. They punished them, mainly the Quakers. The Quakers were very simple people who did not believe God would reveal himself through the Bible, but it's much more liberal than the Puritans. They thought that if you are a good individual, you just sit and meditate and God would reveal himself to you without the Bible or without any clerical, mediation. Okay, those tulip, what is tulip? total depravity. Those people believed that in Adam's fall we sinned all.
Yes, original.
Okay? They believed in the original sin. And, this made them all the time self-searching. I want why are we, going through this? Because as I told you, these beliefs, the Puritan way of life, affected, their literature. I mean, this dogma is very deprivating, very, austere dogma. So if you have a dogma like this, let me just, finish this. And what do you think of such austere dogma? They believe that we are born sinners, okay? We're bad. Think of yourself as bad, as a sinner, And, then the other one, there will be unconditional election. God will choose randomly. So those who are going to be elected are the ones who are going to be saved. You are born a sinner, and you have to expiate for this. You have to deprive yourself from all the pleasures of life in order to expiate for the sin of Adam, Adam. Because they thought that, yes. So, and you have to wait. Perhaps you're going to be elected. Perhaps you're not going to be elected. Imagine you work hard in this course, and then everything will depend on election. The teacher would elect some people at the end. I think you would be, how would you feel? Huh? How would you feel even without being elected, Before the election, you would feel all the time, tense, irritated, So this would have psychological impact on you, negative psychological impact, mainly what we call loneliness. You see, and, I want you to put loneliness, to underline loneliness, because, this might turn out to be a distinctive feature of most of the American, written works, even after the independence. Okay. Now, you have then this unconditional predestination, only if you are selected for salvation. You have limited atonement. Jesus died for the chosen only, not for everyone. So, the grace of God, Jesus, when he came, he died, he sacrificed for what? For those people, okay? And then irresistible grace, God's grace is freely given. It cannot be earned or denied. Again, there is here some doubt, Okay, I mean, there is certainty and there is doubt at some time. And this doubt might lead to some kind of, I would say, loneliness, you're not sure, uncertainty. Okay, we talk about William Bradford, but we didn't talk about, Anne Bradstreet. Anne Bradstreet was,
the first woman.
The first woman writer. She was born in Britain, but she, sailed with her husband and, settled in Massachusetts. She was a very submissive, Puritan life, but she was privileged because she was close to the government, the decision maker, and she even, some of her works were published in Britain. In this course, we're going to start by Anne Bradstreet, and to see how she was trying to integrate her personal concerns with the concerns of, the utopian world. The utopian world. Okay? Edward Taylor was, again, the poet of the colony. He was writing, didactic poetry, yet there was some personal poetry. So when we read his poetry, I mean, the poems we are going to read, they are reinterpretation of the Calvinistic principles, mainly, a spider, upon a spider catching a fly. See, it is like a reading of this Calvinistic, there is something mentioned about, Cotton Mather, and like because those Puritans had a grip over 70 years. And I don't know, have you read anything about the witchcraft? I don't know, like when I was reading about the witchcraft, like some women behaved, in a strange way. So they were accused by those Puritans as being witches who came, who had a contract with the devil. They came to corrupt the American dream. So those women were imprisoned.
Like in the Westland?
Yes. Yeah, like them, they were imprisoned, they were beaten, and there was a famous witch trial, and there was a lady called Anne Hutchinson. She was even banished from that colony. But when I was reading, in fact, I thought that those women, some of them were possessed by certain jinns or spirits, and they thought that they were witches. But they were very, those people were very strict, were very revengeful. Hawthorne, the grandson of John Hawthorne, who was a judge in this trial, wrote all his, fiction, his romance, in order to redeem himself out of the sin of his grandfather, because he thought that his grandfather, along with other Puritans, committed a great sin by abusing those women. Okay. I don't know, this is part of, the saints, how the saints are, it's part of the tulip. Okay. Again, it's illustration of the whole, it is there, like I quoted it from the reading you had. The Puritans were a group of people who separated from the Anglican Church. And some of them did not, separate, like, John Winthrop, who wanted to reform the church from the inside. In fact, he was a student in Cambridge. He graduated from Cambridge, and he thought that going to America would help him to purify, because here you don't have a king, you don't have authority, you don't have anybody to watch you. Okay, I thought, this introduction is very important, but it's now important to show you some videos about, I want to concretize, the image, what I talked verbally with, videos. Okay? So this video is like from Anberg, it's an education. This one talks about utopian promise,
Who were the first Americans? What do we mean by American literature? When did it begin? For more than 300 years, there have been conflicting answers to these questions. Literature, as we think of it today, is hard to identify before the 1700s. But Native Americans, European explorers, and early settlers had oral traditions, left diaries and letters, and wrote poetry and religious texts that are rich and influential parts of American literature.
So it's very important. Some anthologists nowadays,
In the 1600s, two religious
the Heath anthology, for example, includes, early, indigenous literature, oral literature, and they say this is American literature. I think this is, not ethical at all, because you are including a literature, of people who were not, okay, they were, the original people, but they are not like those people who had this, European culture. They had their own special, civilization. They had their own special culture. So again here, these anthologists, were not fair in including, this oral literature of the indigenous people.
groups, the Puritans and the Quakers, arrived in the New World seeking a promised land.
They both spoke of a covenant of sorts, a compact, a contract by which people would live. And in each case, it was a utopian vision.
The Puritans and the Quakers shared the experience of coming to the New World to be able to express their religious beliefs and live their lives according to their religious beliefs, as free as possible from persecution.
John Winthrop led the Puritans to establish Boston in the Massachusetts colony. William Penn and his Society of Friends later made Philadelphia the main Quaker
William
center.
Penn was a Quaker, by the way.
Quaker and Puritan writing shared a love of the plain style, the belief that clear, unadorned prose was more godly than the Baroque style.
This is very, important because it's a characteristic of, the early, American writing. Those diaries, those, narrative accounts,
Biographies.
where, as we said, they were written in plain style. Why? Why do you think they were written in plain style? I mean, there is a paradox. They were written in plain style, and at the same time, they used some, paradoxes, some ironies.
Yeah.
But mainly, they were written in plain style. Why? Because, they had a message to deliver. Those people were didactic. They wanted to teach, moral lessons. They wanted to teach people how to follow their dogma, how to follow, like how to live as Christian. Because this is, a life, they have to live this model of Christian charity, as put in the words of John Winthrop. They have to live like pure Christians, very righteous people who came here to, they unified because God wanted, them to do that, to come to convert those indigenous people. And here again, this is what they thought God sent them for. But what would happen later
Totally
when
not.
they, slaughtered and massacred, those people, again, the idea of converting those people will be very bizarre because, how come you are coming to convert people and you are killing, this is the greatest sin. This is, I think, the original sin of the American, which now they are striving to get,
Rid of it.
to get rid of that,
To change the image.
by having museums for those people, who were, I think, many, many millions of them were, slaughtered, massacred, And in this course, of course, like in the narrative of Mary Ronson in the background, because the whole narrative or the whole captivity was taking place during King's Philip War. I know this is like these introductory lectures are a little bit abstract, but what I intend to set up the scene as I stipulated in the course outline. This week is setting up the scene. We don't want to study an American literature just by closing our eyes and not seeing everything. We want to have a real image. We have to have, this lecture, these ideas and then, they are, like combined with these, mental images. So I leave you, I won't interrupt this.
Puritans and Quakers also shared many hopes for the New World.
We are taught and commanded to love and help.
This is John Winthrop.
Good to one another, and not to do harm and mischief one unto another. William Penn,
sorry.
1681.
That every man might have need of other, and from hence they might be all knit more nearly together in the bonds of brotherly affection. John Winthrop, 1630.
Both Penn, in his letter to the Lenape chiefs, and Winthrop, in his sermon, A Model of Christian Charity, wrote of founding a perfect community, a utopia. These texts, and others like them, are the beginnings of utopian literature in the Americas. For every utopian vision, there were painful realities, terrifying experiences like those described in The Captivity and Restoration of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson, posed urgent questions for colonists in the New World. It is no new thing for God's precious ones to drink as deep as others of the cup.
Later, we're going, in the middle of the course to have, to study, Emerson. And there is something called transcendentalism, which is like, equivalent to romanticism. So the American transcendentalism was influenced by this, utopian. It is like the transcendentalist, tendency. There is like, what is transcendentalist? Is this tendency to have this utopian life, this ideal life. So you would find that in every text, there is like this tendency for a perfect, and utopian life. Mainly in the text written in the 19th century. So the tendency towards or to have this utopian life is there.
1682. Hardship, illness, and death spurred the beginnings of dystopian literature, writing to trace the breakdown of idealized hopes.
So it's no longer utopian because, there were hardships. Hardships of the exploration itself, hardships of the encounter with those indigenous
By
people.
the end of that time, Puritans thought and wrote of themselves as Americans. John Winthrop was born to a moneyed English family with strong Puritan roots. With an economic recession and a Catholic sympathizer on the English throne, the New World offered Winthrop the freedom to practice his religion and the chance to make his fortune. On April 8, 1630, Winthrop and his family set sail on board the Arabella, bound for North America.
Not everybody had the same fervor as Winthrop did for his religious faith. Other people probably were coming 90% for economic opportunity and 10% for religion. He had to persuade them all to join together, to band together with a common motive, common purpose.
Thus stands the cause between God and us. We are entered into covenant with him for this work. We have hereupon besought him of...
This is what I said, like,
The mission.
the principle of democracy. Like on Arabella, because they are talking about Arabella here. Like he gave the sermon on Arabella on the ship, and he was telling them like what they should do, like when they land on the,
For our posterity is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, to walk humbly with our God. For this end, we must be knit together in this work as
This is
one.
perfect, but like the practice would be like different,
For people on a ship, surely the nearest and most provoking fear was not that 50 years from
Okay, I think, I would leave this video and other videos. There is another video. I put the link and you can, find other links. So I would like stop here and like after that to assign you like what should be done in the following, weeks, mainly, the presentation part.
We shall find
Yeah,
that the God
okay.
of Israel is among us. When
Thank you
Canaanite
for
shall be-
listening. Do you have any question? Do you have any question? No questions? Okay.
Teacher,
Yes.
I read that John Smith was not a Puritan.
He was not a Puritan. He was a knight. He was an English, knight like Raleigh and other people.
And how he could match this trip with the Puritans, the settlers?
No, he was like, when he came like with, Virginia Company. It was like a chartered company. He came like for the sake of commercial, John Smith, not for religious, purposes. Okay, this is, for today. And after we switch off, we'll talk about what we should do, okay?